Hello, and welcome back to episode 11 of Behind the Session. Right, so this time we have a few fun things to get into. Firstly, Ryuzaki, the big brother of Shi, which was quite an interesting character for me because it's one I put a lot of time to fleshing out and finding a lot of depth for, which hopefully is conveyed in the early parts of this episode that, again, I hope you've watched ahead of time, the actual Wollen Retold Session 11, because yes, this video is largely pointless and spoilery to you. But in that video, having Ryuzaki kind of meet Shi and have that sort of moment of, oh god, is this going to be like a confrontation? And then no, it's just lovely and wonderful, and he's just a really loving, good older brother. Now, I should say, because he wasn't always a good brother to little Shi when they were both young, and he immensely regrets it. And I have a lot more depth to the character, some of which you will not be able to see in this episode alone, but you do get a lot of insight to what sort of person he is and his, I suppose his motivations on the path that he's walking now and what's led him to the Sunlight Church and trying to, be a healer and be a helper and a protector, as he feels fundamentally that he ultimately failed Shi the first time by not being those things. But with Ryuzaki comes the interesting conversation of having a character and or a scene, I think, a character and a scene where sometimes as a DM, and this is a pain that is a part of the experience, it's not a bad thing, I'm not complaining about it, I'm addressing and discussing it to relate to other DMs out there that may feel a similar thing, maybe going through it, and this might provide some closure if they're watching these videos, so that same curiosity about it, and how to be a DM and things about the experience. Or maybe as players, you would also like to kind of get some more insight into what a DM goes through, that may help you in turn be able to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Accommodate, I think is the word. Accommodate your DM more in some aspects by recognising certain things, and, it's a give and a take. By all means, I do not expect the players to sit down and start worshipping the DM and having to always cater to them at all times. Players should, of course, always be having their own fun, but players are pretty good at doing that. It's the DMs that sometimes need to remind themselves they should be having fun too. And in this case, I admit, this was not the most fun experience of what happened with Ryuzaki. However, it is one that I fully welcome and was a fantastic learning lesson, a good reminder for me in my early days of being a Dungeon Master for my first campaign, that sometimes you can make a scene or a character with a major, huge influence. A lot of people already know what I'm going to say here. This is if you've played the game, you know where this might be going. You can have this huge idea of what you want this character to be, or the scene to be. How even as a player, sometimes you have envisionary massive goals for your character, only to then come to the unfortunate conclusion as you start playing them, because, oh no, I don't know if I can, through either me or for other circumstances, maybe I can't live up to this sort of idea out of my head. It has to be transformed or altered, sometimes in ways you don't always intentionally mean. Like for example, good old Critical Role, very start of the second campaign, with as minimal spoilers as possible, Liam O'Brien plays Caleb, who was a cool wizard character, and from the get-go he had all his cool ambitions and ideas, and as he has famously said so before, one thing he did not ever plan, with all these ideas he had for this very in-depth character, was for him to be stinky. But his wonderful table mate, the wonderful Laura Bailey, decided to play Jester from the start, who would often say things were very out of pocket, decided on first meeting that he was stinky and told him so, and thus became the immediate, within 20 minutes, the immediate canon to the world that Caleb smelt awful. Which is it's a wonderful thing to be put onto your character straight away without you having any plans or intentions for that to be the case. And so I need to. I am digressing terribly. I apologize. I had plans for Ryuzaki, much the same way that Caleb did. Now, some of those plans, as is the nature of things, just like with some scenes, did not come to complete fruition. And that's completely okay. I left the option open, after all, for the characters to be able to do this. But if you've watched again, you probably should have. If you've watched the 11th session of Wollen Retold, you will realise that by the end of the session, when given the first opportunity to really do so, the players do decide at this point in time to ditch Ryuzaki and go their separate ways. They did not want to continue to travel with him, have anything to do with him. At the very least, they needed a break from him and get away from him. And it makes sense for reasons outside of just they didn't like the character, because I do think they did in a limited capacity, but obviously he was not quite the favourite of the party that I had thought he may have been able to step into the role of. So there was a lot more Ryuzaki elements that I could have had, and a lot of the stuff that happened early in the session expressing his regrets and his feelings could have tied a lot into the idea of setting up seeds that would grow later. And clearly, sometimes, as a DM, you just need to be ready to prepare yourself for the fact that once in a while, your characters, your players, will not respond as favourably to something massive that you had in mind as you would like, or at least as you would expect. And then, of course, vice versa, as we all well know, this is even more well documented in just about every table as opposed to the alternative. It is extremely common for almost every single table of D&D ever to experience the issue of a dungeon master who has created a small scene, or more likely a small character, an NPC, throwaway, perhaps thought of on the spot if you're not the planning sort, if you prefer to improv it on as you go. Throwaway character, small character, just a simple merchant or a very small background extra, that through no earthly logical reason whatsoever, and pure just shenanigans and ridiculousness on part of the party, as is their custom, sometimes those small tiny characters or those small little scenes that are supposed to be more or less throwaway become the absolute most important part of the entire campaign. And I imagine that's also, where you get the sort of the memes, like, this will date to the video, but for example, what is it? Boblin the Goblin? The idea of the wonderful little sometimes creatures that lots of players like to I was going to try to find a nicer word to say it, but basically kidnap a random enemy child of a gang or a bandits or people they've dealt with, and like, you're ours now, and essentially just recruit them to the party and take them by force, if necessary, to come be their friend, because the alternative is being horrifically killed, and it becomes this whole silly, and sometimes strangely, profoundly heartfelt experience, where it becomes, this little NPC becomes, such an important part to the entire rest of the adventure. Sometimes even like the heroic sacrifice, giving their lives at the end. So I got the opposite of that with Ryuzaki. Had a lot of ideas for him, a lot of things that we could do, a lot more that he could really start to make she wrestle as Quentin played him with his whole family and life beforehand versus his religion, his devotion to his beliefs in his goddess, and it did not quite work out that way. Which again, I'm only explaining this because I'm giving a full laydown of the account of what happened. I don't mind that it ended up not being the way that it went. That's fine. It's a sandbox campaign. It was open world. That's the way I wanted it to be from the beginning. I did not want to be railroaded in any way, shape, or form. I threw them a big bone, and they weren't hungry. They didn't take it. Fair enough. I would be remiss not to mention at this point, as I do not believe to this day I have ever even brought this up to any of my players before, but there was one scene that I had been thinking about for at least 2 or 3 months, that I thought about for multiple sessions we played about one day doing, that never came to fruition. The first fully fleshed scene, I'm no doubt there were more if I try to think of in the future, but at this point I had one big idea of this full-fledged scene that never happened, and thus I feel I need to mention it now. More or less that way it can be catalogued somewhere, that it wasn't completely taken by the wind, which was that Ryuzaki would have played a massive role if she had ever been caught or exposed by the Sunlight Order as being sort of their sworn enemy of the wrong religion, so to speak, and it would have probably caused she to be arrested, left in a cell for a couple of days, possibly. Probably so heavily guarded, the players would have had a very hard time being able to free him, and thus it might have been the start of the next session where I had this whole idea that Ryuzaki would come to see his brother behind themselves, having learned the truth of what he really is, and how they're on, the opposite ends of the whole thing. And the extreme confliction that Ryuzaki would face would probably be done off-screen before he arrived, and sort of having made his decision long in advance. He would come very stern and angry with a very changed, cold dynamic towards she. Of course, with the other guards watching onwards, and it would have essentially culminated with she coming out, likely on the day of his execution, because he would have been hung in the public city square. Ryuzaki would have been the one, volunteered even, leaving poor old she with no degree of dread and heartbreak at the idea that his own brother will come, take him from his cell, bruise him up a little bit, probably, and make quite the performance as he marches his own little brother that he cared so much about just a short time ago, up to the gallows, through the crowd of people booing and throwing things at him, all the the Sunlight followers, and set him up for execution. And I would have intentionally played it so that way, to the very, very last second, you constantly question or fully misbelieve Ryuzaki's motives, that he really is loyal to the Sunlight Church and will happily do his duty and execute his own brother. Of course, as a soft-hearted DM that I am, deep down sometimes, because I also have to do some horrible things to the party. That is, unfortunately, the role of the storyteller, to put your wonderful characters through all sorts of strife and conflict and problems, and see how they fare. That is the core nature of conflict in the story of narratives and books and Dungeons and Dragons. And of course, Ryuzaki would, because I'm not a complete monster, I would have truly had him care more about his brother. The whole reason he joined the Sunlight Order Church in the first place was because he felt he had failed she. He's not about to execute his refound brother that was the cause of so much of his trauma and his motivations in life, just to work with the bloody church that he joined on his for she's sake in the first place. So it would have been the very last minute. Ryuzaki's the one who's gonna put the noose around poor old she's neck. He's gonna have his hand on the lever to pull to drop the floor and kill she, and then last second, when it's looking real bad, make it nice and dramatic, we'd have Ryuzaki turn around, and he would have likely, cut down the priest next to him, one of the guards, instead of fight them off as he cuts the rope free of the noose, so that way she can escape, and he would maybe even shove she overboard the platform into a wagon that he and the rest of the party, Ryuzaki, assumedly and retrospectively, would have met up with the party, which I would have discussed with all the other players except Quentin, who was playing she, outside of the table, so that everyone else was in on it, in the sense that the party and Ryuzaki would have all come together and be like, right, we're going to stage this whole thing, this will be his chance to get him out of there and save him and get him to escape, and they would have got him on a wagon, the party would have been ready to go off the horses, they would have taken off, Church would have given chase, maybe Ryuzaki would have joined them on the wagon, maybe he would have kept fighting back where he was there, and I love the idea that it would have ended some massive chase across the city by religious zealots still after him as the party all fought on wagon base, had a whole moving combat encounter as they tried to get away. It was a fantastic and awesome scene that I really would have liked to have played out, which just never came to happen, and so it's cool that I can now tell everyone listening to this of that, and it's also neat that if any of the players do happen to listen to this, they get to hear about a whole thing that I put a lot of time and effort into thinking about and going back to the drawing board on and really reconfiguring what would have been a really interesting, fun, dynamic and scene and combat encounter for the Wollen campaign that just never actually happened, because, good job she, you never got caught or exposed for being I suppose the much more frowned upon religious organization member. And that's essentially the summation of everything that I have to say about Ryuzaki as far as that goes. There's no point going to any more exploration as to what else he could have been, because it never came to be, and thus was the role. Sometimes you do have to accept as a DM that, hey, players aren't feeling this thread that you're putting out for them. That's fine. Put it away and try it again. Maybe they'll like the next one. Players are pretty good at managing to find their own fun. They will seek out the things they enjoy the most. Your job as a DM, if you're trying to do this sort of more open world, more non-linear, kind of let them be the centre of the story and kind of design the world and the story and the conflict and everything that goes on around them as they go, then I think it's very helpful in that essence to be able to learn to listen to your players and respond positively and flesh out the things they show more interest in, if necessary. And so, when I say if necessary, I'm referring to if you haven't fleshed it out enough. Not as like, I don't want to convey the sense of like it's only if you have to that you should kind of cater to your party. The idea is that you always want to. These are your friends at the table, right? You should be playing with people that you want to be having fun, having a good time. And so thus falls the heavy role and duty of the dungeon master to accommodate what they want to see and hope in return that they recognise what you do for them and go, right, we also want to make sure the dungeon master is having fun. So even though we don't really want to do this mission or care about this NPC as much, the DM clearly seems to care and put some effort into it. So I guess we'll throw 'em a bone and we'll go spend a good 30 minutes to an hour of our day just following this lead and seeing what the DM has. And, ideally, hopefully, the DM has quite nice surprises that the party will end up enjoying following that track more than they expected to. But nonetheless, that's enough on that topic. Heading to Bluestone, which was the fun thing. It was kind of by this point, it was becoming a thing in the back of my head that before this campaign ends, it would be nice to give the players an opportunity to try, if they wish to, visit every settlement, city and villages on Wollen's map. And I guess we'll see if they manage to do it. But Bluestone got to get ticked off for them. Bluestone was interesting because while they did technically go there, they really didn't explore the place at all. And that was okay, because I gave them that choice. When they arrived, I said, hey, do you want to spin around here, kind of get to see things going on, blah, blah, blah? Or do you just want to immediately just kind of, you've arrived here because of teleportation and now you can just leave. You can just head straight to the mission, which is not actually located in this location specifically. And in this case, this is what unusual for them. They usually didn't mind exploring around and having a little, a look and sniff of everything, whatever else. But for whatever reason, and what was extremely interesting as far as you consider fate and how things would play out in the time to come, because this has such a huge, huge impact on the rest of the story, they chose to kind of skip by it and overlook it. And I don't blame them. No, likely they thought it was more just getting supplies, basic things, and they didn't expect too much to actually be there. I'm assuming. Maybe that's just how they were feeling that day. I can't really speak for them. This was, of course, years ago now. But had they stayed, as I alluded to in a very simple and small way in the episode of Wollen Retold, there was a house there with a dying sick mother and a young boy, her son, that would have had just monumental effects on the plot, the story, where things went, what would have happened in the ending, and everything else that could have happened afterwards, even beyond this campaign, could have been so drastically affected. Had they gone to that house, had they wandered around the village and stumbled into it, and had a interaction with those two specific NPCs, which, if you're listening to this at the time that it's been recorded and coming out, then you probably have no idea why it's such a big deal. But I do hope it stokes your curiosity, because there's quite an interesting payoff to come down the line. And so, for that reason, as I catch myself, I best not say anything more, just to say that them choosing not to go through Bluestone did have a massive impact on things. And maybe, I don't mind that it worked out the way it did. I don't mind they missed it, because I like what happened because they didn't get involved, because they didn't prevent, a potentially bad thing from happening. I do like that I got a chance to really flesh out and completely explore the full extent of those consequences for not being able to step in and do something to really help out other people when they could have, in this specific case, because, oh boy, was it a hell of one. But anyway, you'll see that in time to come. I will move on from that and not touch it. I was going to say it could have been a lesson that, if you really, as a DM, wanted this big influential thing to be a thing, then I should have made it more obvious, like, hey, here's a thing that you should at least be aware of, like a point of interest on a map in a video game. Have a sort of a thing to say, I should have pointed out the house to them, is my point. I should have done something that they had at least a passing awareness that there was a situation going on there. But of course, in this context, as I said, I wasn't worried whether they did or not, so I didn't mind they didn't go into Bluestone in the first place. They didn't get to fully actually find a way to come across that home. Totally fine. But going forth, if you do want that, like I said, maybe it is best that you're always making sure your players at least have the chance to realise when they are potentially missing something. A good lesson that I think I've already incorporated into my own stuff going forth, but good for anyone else who's listened to it as well, in case it hasn't crossed their mind before. Now, a really fun part, of course, this is good. Jacob, who played Dane, by this point, I can gladly say he was already well informed of what was going on with his character. More specifically, and this was something that I took extremely seriously at the time, and to this day, I would still act the same way. Again, this is another place where I get to kind of pat myself on the back a little bit, at the sake of coming across as egotistical, because I am, especially now, years into DMing and having a lot of experience as a dungeon master and having a very good understanding of the game compared to when I did with Wollen, and I was very much learning as I went in some places. I think it is extremely awesome to think back and realise that from the beginning I had the right sort of mindset on my shoulders, in my head as a DM, that when I realised I had the opportunity to kind of pull off this massive plot twist since session 8/session 9, where they kind of met and interacted with going back in time and then being back in the Doppelganger Tavern, and then that loose thread that we never resolved, and that was very much something I never forgot about, because I knew I would do something like juicy like this later with it, when they least expected, because that's the best way to do Doppelgangers, right? You always want it to be a surprise sort of gotcha moment for shape-shifting body snatchers. But having them kind of have, run into Kate, who was actually the doppelganger, we even made, I think we made an implication or a hint that, back in the third episode of one of the doppelgangers mentioning they were going to taking the form of a pretty woman or something along those lines, I believe. I hope I put that in there, because I always intended to. I haven't gone back to check, unfortunately. But with the doppelganger being Kate in disguise, and of course intentionally getting close to them, finding the one that was the most interested in her, which was Dane, and then intentionally trying to be very romantic and very whatever else, and trying to get that sort of connection going, all the way to make it easier prey, both to kind of have time in private to kind of ask questions, get to learn and know more about him, get a better understanding of his identity, his behaviour, and then being able to, of course, in isolation later, take advantage and go on for the kill. Very, very cool. But I was never going to do it unless I had the very clear and direct consent and permission from the player first. So, at the end of last session? Yes. After session 9, I believe. So, before the actual killing of Dane would happen, we ended the session, and everyone was, I was getting up from the table and going off, and I grabbed Jacob and asked him just to do me a favour, help me move some chairs back from the table, back to where they needed to be in the house, and I got him to come up with me privately. We had a quick, good 5-minute conversation where I just kind of asked him, hey, so I want to do this really exciting thing. I was careful not to give spoilers or anything else like that. I just kind of alluded to this big thing I want to do, but it could affect you in a negative way, and therefore I just want to see if you're open to the idea of potentially losing a character or anything. Before I proceed to give you details if you're interested. But he gave me yep, he was very keen, very curious about it. It sounded exciting to him. He'd been playing Dane for a good while now, remembering that this was taking place over, by this point, this was like months in, 5-6 months we'd been playing the game, in between when we could have sessions, every couple of weeks. And it was very fun as a DM to get to kind of give an insider behind the screen look for one of my players, go, hey, here's this little thing I'm doing. It was fun to kind of get to be a little bit spoilery, because I had very good justification to do so, and of course his permission allowing me to do so. And so Jacob and I worked together, talked about it, and so I kind of, when he told me he was okay, he was open to hearing it, he wouldn't say and blabber, even if he decided to change his mind when he heard the details, and it wouldn't affect how he played. I did kind of confirm, yes, this is actually a doppelganger. He was surprised. I was quite impressed that none of the players did not foresee it coming at all. I didn't want them to, so it's good, but I did leave enough clues and enough hints, especially their first meeting, and the very curious timing and placement of where they found Kate. But all the same, I think in Wollen Retold, I have made it a little bit more obvious, at least by more directly addressing the exact clues I already left them the first time of Kate being potentially suspicious. I do not think it would be that hard to kind of predict it with Wollen Retold. I assume. I haven't had a lot of audience feedback from people that weren't a part of the campaign to tell me so, but I assume it was probably not the craziest plot twist to you, but for the players, it caught them completely off guard. Jacob loved it. He thought it was great. It was an exciting opportunity for him to go ahead and confirm that he wanted his character to be killed this way, so that way he could have a whole new what's it called? An entirely new character to play instead, which was going to be really fun for him. So, with his permission and his consent, and he was totally down for it, I was like, brilliant, great. So the next time you go and sleep for the night with Kate in private, whatever else after it happens, can accept at that point, from that point onwards, as we just kind of skipped morning, you are now playing fake Dane, played by a doppelganger, and so he started to slightly change some of his manners, be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more blunt or rude at times, in very small ways, and it was very fun to kind of just, once in a while, I would throw like a small clue or a suggestion that would seem a little bit suspicious for the rest of the party, that might imply they should be, narrowing their eyes and squinting at their friend at the table a little bit when Dane's acting a little bit out of character. And I loved doing it because it would make Jacob sweat as he tries to keep the cover. It was a lot of fun because mental torture is just one of the favorite pastimes of Dungeon Masters, apparently. Or I'm just, extremely self-projecting and just hoping that I'm not the only person out there that's a bit of a psycho as a Dungeon Master. I think you have to be. I need to keep telling myself that, or else I have to ask myself a lot of questions. So, kind of that more or less finishes most of the stuff here. Of course, we can probably go and expand upon Jacob and getting to play his new character Tywin next time in more detail. Might be a better way to start the next Behind the Sessions recap. But getting Tywin to essentially be a very, very new fresh paint, a very new breath of fresh air for Jacob, who's been playing this, a stoic, almost sort of a designated party leader, dwarven barbarian. Him switching up to beginning to play an absolute silly nonsense man of an elven undead bard is is quite a fun dynamic shift and change. And it was very, very awesome to kind of get to see first Zach and now Jacob, sadly not Cade yet, but getting to see the other two get to kind of explore and find new characters and roleplay different types of personalities, and just going to have a whole lot of fun with that, which was really awesome to see. I suppose I can point out now that as I was thinking about saving for next time, it was really neat seeing how in the first few episodes, maybe the first 4 or 5-ish, of Wollen, that was when you could see the players struggling the most to come out of their shells, as most of them were very new to D&D for the most part. A lot of them did not ever even voice their characters. They would not speak in character. They would kind of more or less narrate or give like a basic third-person explanation of what their character was doing or what they said, and summarizing it. Whereas I, the DM, was trying to do all the big voices and their personalities, trying to kind of encourage them, say, hey, I'm in the deep end, I'm making a fool of myself, it's okay to come join me, I'm already doing it, you won't be, you won't be the odd one out. And of course that was so hard, because the Dungeon Master acting that way is very different from the players themselves, who are all mates and friends who knew each other a lot longer than I knew any of them. I knew them far more recently. I'd met them far more recently than the rest, who are more like group dynamic already. And I think that's why bringing Quentin in, as I wanted to do, as we explained previously, playing She, having a guy who's much more comfortable and more experienced doing actual roleplay in character for Dungeons & Dragons campaigns and games, I think helped a lot in just kind of being like, oh, look, there's another player at the table who is now more comfortable acting and speaking and doing the things that the DM is doing. And this is how he does it as a player, and this is how the player approaches it. Because naturally a player and a DM are going to approach the way they do their characters differently, because the DM has to do hundreds, and whereas the player has the benefit and the fortune, and I suppose in some ways the limitation, of having to play one. So therefore, a lot more depth, a lot more fleshing out, a lot more aspects of their personality that you'll get to see, but all a much more narrow and limited sort of spectrum of what you can work with when you cannot play the big giant evil villain and the sweet old lady in the same game. At the same time, at least. And yeah, this is kind of the point of where we're really seeing Quentin coming in and kind of going to be there. It really helps out a lot with kind of making the players feel more comfortable by having another player at the table that is already doing it, therefore they don't feel like they're the first one. And now we have Jacob getting to play a new character, Tywin, rest in peace, poor old Dane, and getting to kind of shake it up, especially as Tywin by no means, despite his bravado and his beliefs, is not going to be the same party leader, even though he thinks he is one, that Dane actually was. And thus it gives a nice, entirely new dynamic and shift to the party, and freshens things up, leading up to the ending, where we get to episode 15 as the finale, and of course, the epilogue, which is kind of more of its own thing. Anyway, talked on for long enough. Hopefully there was some good insight or interesting antidotes to take away from this one. And I suppose I'll catch you again in the next one. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.